share my screen and get into the real cost of refugees, which I'm not going to address.
Just to let you know, Rad, just to let, or not Rad, Paul, just to let you know,
Yeah.
Aladdin is he's in the chat, and he said he wants to come on and talk about who has a right to the Holy Land, evidently.
Well,
no, he said he's going to work now.
Because if he could read his own Quran, he would realize that Jerusalem's not even mentioned in there. So that's up to him. He's got to read from his own Quran first, and until he gets educated on that, I'm not going to bother with him because I don't like to debate people who have that slow processing skill.
Okay, well let me just tell him then okay, you can come to my show on Tuesday, and you can come waste my time. All right, Paul.
All right. So we're going to get into the real cost of refugees. And this is for all refugees. It's not just Islam. It's not just anything. This is the real cost of refugees. And this is something to think about. I mean, when we talk about refugees, you talk about the expenses for housing, living, learning, English, schooling, and more. In the United States, they tell you it's all provided by federal dollars. That is a lie from the pit of hell. Okay, let me just get over here. All right. So the reason I started this topic up is last week, somebody wrote for our President Dementia. He's making him say, today I announced that the United States will welcome up to 100,000 Ukrainians and others fleeing Russia's aggression. You want to think about this. That will bring us up to close to 300,000 migrants within 1 year. That is almost back to Civil War era of pushing people into the country. That's how far back. I mean, it's a phenomenal, maybe World War II. I don't think we were even that high then. I could be wrong. I think we were more secure back then. But this amount of refugees is just, it's not sustainable. Financially, it's not sustainable. All right. I'm going to make this larger just because I can't get my mouse back over here. All right. Come on. All right. So the real cost of refugees. The Refugee Act of 1980 explicitly forbids the immigration of those who have committed persecutory acts on others. Now, the reason I want to bring this out is some of the information I'm going to bring in later. In order for a person to qualify, they can't have committed any persecution. This is extremely important to think about. When we talked about the Syrians coming here, we couldn't tell if they had persecuted or engaged in terrorist acts when they came here. So that's a big thing. Now we're talking about the Ukrainians, and believe it or not, that is a big issue. And I'm going to talk about some of those things that I found. So again, this is a huge issue. The term refugee does not include any person who ordered, incited, assisted, or otherwise participated in the persecution of any person on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political opinion. So this would disqualify Aladdin, okay, because he's okay with persecuting Jews and he's willing to take part in that. So that would disqualify Aladdin from coming to the United States as a refugee. The Refugee Resettlement Program started under President Jimmy Carter through the passing of the Refugee Act of 1980. Now, some people want to credit this to Ronald Reagan. I believe this was signed before Ronald Reagan took office. So I want you to think about that. Any person, this act defines any person who is outside of any country of such person's nationality, or in the case of a person. Now, think about this. That would make all of the Afghanistan people who were coming to the United States on our planes, they took them here without them becoming refugees. That's a violation of our code. So technically, we made them refugees. So technically, they don't qualify for refugee status. This is extremely important to grasp. This is why this is why they're staying on these army bases, because they technically do not qualify as refugees, so they can't be financed as refugees. All right. Any person Again, this is any person who is outside of a country. Such person's nationality, in the case of a person having no nationality, is outside any country in which such person last habitually resided and who is unable to or unwilling to return to and is unable or unwilling to avail himself or of the protection of that country because of persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political opinion. This 1980 definition of a refugee is basically any person who is outside of their home country, who is unable or unwilling to return because of persecution or well-founded fear. These are extremely important to think about. Okay, let me just go to the next slide here. All right. So today, those labeled as refugees are selected. Here's where we get into trouble. And defined not by the American government, but by the United Nations. This brings into question whether those labeled as refugees do indeed meet the 3 criteria listed, simply because the UN officially designates those who have lived in Palestinian-controlled zones in Israel all their lives. When they've lived there all their lives, born there and everything, they're calling them refugees. Been there for generations. And this violates the United States definition of refugee and is extremely problematic. So my request of our government is that we remove the UN from the process. And this is extremely important because their definition of refugee does not work with our definition. It's problematic. All right. So what do we know about Ukraine? Their government was and is corrupt. We know that the Nazis sought and found shelter in the Ukraine. Now, I got this from a 1992 report, and I found this rather interesting. So in 1992, that's 30 years ago. Kind of doesn't seem that long ago, but 30 years ago. There are between 11 and 12 million ethnic Russians in Ukraine, including, again, 1992. Approximately 1.5 million who live in the Crimean Peninsula. The Crimea is the only area of the Ukraine in which Russians constitute the majority, about 2/3 of the population. Now, this, again, 1992, this was written. Uncaptive Minds, this came from. Uncaptive Minds indicates that several outbursts of anti-Russian sentiment occurred in the days before the December 1st, 1992 referendum on independence. However, a majority of Russians in Ukraine voted in support of the referendum. Please find attached articles. Okay, so here's the thing to think about. The people in this area wanted their part of the Ukraine to be Russian. And this, again, is in 1992. Correspondent, they were also saying that here that the western regions of Ukraine, except for the western regions of Ukraine, most Ukrainians spoke Russian. And there are several cultural similarities. Now, it's hard to find this stuff. Now, let me tell you why. Unless you're using a European search engine, Google and many other search engines block you from finding this information. Believe me, I have been looking. I have been looking and looking and looking. And it bothers me that it's so hard to find this stuff. Now, since Russia invaded the Crimea, there's been an ongoing culture war between the Ukraine and Russia. Russia will forbid other languages than Russian being taught. And then Ukraine gives out a rule saying, oh, you can't teach Russian. So these are just point out culture wars. And this is what you have to look at behind the scene. Some people consider this, no matter how you look at it, either side, preparation for genocide. They consider it a step towards genocide. And
Genocide of who, though? Of the Ukrainians or the Russians?
The article I originally read that called it a step towards genocide is a more Russian-friendly perspective. They considered the Ukrainians willing to and working on wiping out the Russians is what they were saying. So some of this stuff that I found, which, like I said, I'm hoping somebody can verify some of this, but all right. here's where I'm getting at. Can Ukrainians qualify as refugees to America? Now, this is what surprised me. Researchers for the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, outlined the serious crimes that have been taking place in the Donbass or eastern region of the Ukraine. The Ukrainian army has been shelling the cities of the DPR and LPR for 8 years. Okay. Shelling of a nursing home in Longzak. This happened July 28th of 2014, where many elderly patients were killed. The report I saw on this had many vivid pictures. From 2014 to 2021, the Ukrainian military had killed over 150 children and wounded countless more. This is actually a memorial that is placed there for those children. Again, in 2021, the ambassador of Ukraine in Berlin, Andriy Melnik, said on a German radio station that Ukraine needed to regain its nuclear status if the country could not join NATO. We happen to know that there was no chance for them to join NATO. And this is where things are going to get truly interesting. One of my biggest questions about this entire Ukrainian conflict, Russian-Ukrainian conflict, war, has been, why did Russia go through Chernobyl? You're about to find out why. I just this kind of blew my mind.
Yes, I would like to know that because that made absolutely no sense. No sense whatsoever.
I'm sorry?
So that makes no sense. They went to Chernobyl and made a big deal of taking the red zone area. I mean,
So
it
now-
absolutely made no sense.
Yeah. So this is why I'm starting to figure it out because of what I've been reading. Again, we have to consider, can Ukrainians qualify? They're talking about taking 100,000 Ukrainians here. Can they qualify? Now, pay close attention to this one. It says, according to the Russian nuclear physicist Alexander Borodov, Ukraine is capable of creating a dirty atomic bomb using the existing capacities, the material for which can serve as spent nuclear fuel or nuclear power plants that exist in Ukraine. If true, this alone. See, now they have designated Chernobyl as a special government project, basically. And this is the part that makes me start to understand them going through Chernobyl first. Were they looking to stop a possible creation of a dirty bomb? And as much as I don't want to believe it, that would explain going through Chernobyl first. I had thought about that.
Well, okay, hold on. Can you back up on that, Paul?
Yes.
Okay, why go through? I mean, this guy looks like he spent a little too much time in Chernobyl to begin with.
This is one of the best pictures I could find of him.
Right. Okay. Well. Okay. So explain to me why. Okay. Why go through Chernobyl? Are you saying that there's still unspent nuclear fuel there?
Chernobyl was still being used as in the 1990s. They started using Chernobyl again. They had 3 reactors active. They shut them down one at a time, but
who's
this is only recently.
Recently, okay.
Okay, and I'm talking about within the past few years, they shut the last one down. However, in doing that, they actually designated one of them, I mean, the Chernobyl site, as a special project for the state. The way it's written, it looks like it's a military project. So I'm not the expert on Russia, but that would make, and the Ukraine, but that would make me extremely curious.
Okay, so your argument is that the reason why they went through Chernobyl is to prevent the Ukrainians from getting their hands on the the fissile
That's-
material, the spent rods or whatever, and you making a dirty bomb with that? Is that
That's what
the
this
Russians
looks
wanted to
like.
prevent that? That's okay. That's okay.
That's
All
what
right.
this information looks like. It's again this stuff. I would not have found this if I'm strictly using European search engines, and you cannot find it through Google. Now I'm going to send anybody who I can't verify. This actually is a document that was sent to that company, sent to that organization, and I'm going to go back. I'll go back and share that again. That's from the OSCE. This is researchers who wrote this document. I do find it very favorable towards Russia. And I'm not saying it's not Russian influenced. However, what I am saying is some of these things can be verified because I did look at other non-Russian sources and found some of these things verified. So I'm very, very concerned when I see this. This guy may look a little bug-eyed, but maybe he has reason to be concerned. I'm going to leave that there. Now let's talk about the actual financial cost to American taxpayers, because the cost of refugees, again, if they get to come here and they are allowed, and I'm going to, I guess Rad is back. I'm going to put him back in. All right. If they get to come here, your actual federal tax dollars that get spent are very, very small. And this is what should concern you. The federal government requires each state to design and lay out their plan for the refugee resettlement program that they're taking part. These plans provide cash, medical, and any other emergency assistance needed by the individuals eligible for the refugee resettlement services in order for them to obtain, quote, adequate, keep this in mind, adequate living conditions. By the way, they said adequate living conditions. You know who pays for their place to live? It's not the federal tax dollar. It's your state welfare.
Right.
Okay. Now it gets better. Now, you see these terms down here? Refugee cash assistance, temporary assistance for needy families. 10th is the only one that they share. Family independence, refugee medical assistance, refugee social services. This is what gets important to understand, that these terms, these are allotments in addition to your state's welfare program. So who's going to pay the price for these 100,000 refugees from wherever they're coming from? And for each individual refugee that comes here, this is your state local taxes that pay for the vast majority of it. The federal dollars go towards, here's where they go towards, your agencies. The vast majority of that money goes towards the agencies that bring them in. They get paid per refugee. That's why they're always recruiting the government to bring more in. So you can't trust. This is the scary thing. And they actually take, on day one, when a refugee comes to the United States, day one, when they get off that plane, they take them to your local state welfare office. They get them IDs. Some of them, I want you to think about that. What kind of ID did they come with? Now they have a government ID that identifies them as a refugee living in the United States, and it's a state ID. You have paid for that with your tax dollars, and that enables them for your state and your state welfare system. They are now put in front of every American citizen living in your state to get welfare. And that every military person, they're ahead of them. And that just disgusts me right there. Okay. Irreparable harm. I'm going to keep going on that. A further burden occurs when, as refugees qualify for medical and refugee medical assistance. This, you would thought that would be an interesting piece where that would take care of the medical issues. No, it's what the RMA doesn't pick up the majority of costs. It's just when the Medicaid doesn't cover it. Oh, and guess where Medicaid comes from? It's your state tax dollars. Education is compulsory in the United States. This creates an additional burden on taxpayers. The cost of educating students from non-English speaking countries is higher than those refugees who do speak English. Since non-English speakers are guaranteed instruction by a teacher of English of a second language, we call them TESOL or ESOL teachers, ESL teachers. Depending on the amount a person needs to learn of English person needs to learn, this could require an awful lot of cash. You might need a translator to accompany a student. You might have to give your student one of these expensive phones so it can translate material for them. I've actually seen that in the classroom. Have you seen that, Eric?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I have. What this also does is it places an incredible burden on the teacher in the classroom, because these people, they're mainstreamed into your classroom. And I'm not saying that they should be mainstreamed into your classroom, but if the child, I've had kids in the classroom that were from, the main, these ESL teachers, the majority of them are Spanish speakers, and rightly so, because of the majority of the people that are coming into our country and going into the school systems are coming from Central South America, where Spanish is spoken. But that they're not equipped to provide instruction and services to people. I've had a kid from North Korea a couple years ago in one of my classes. Did speak a lick of English when he got there. But the thing about kids is that they're resilient. They generally catch on pretty quickly as far as learning a new language. But the burden on the educational system in totality, because these ESL teachers, you only have like one per.
This is your local
school.
This is your local tax dollars. This is your school tax dollars. This is the cost. This raises the cost for education for a child. It can raise it as much as $3,000 or $4,000.
And on top of that, you have to provide them different, like if you let's say you have a handout, you have to provide it in their native language. So you have to go searching for this on the web. You have to find something for them to do in their language, and then when they fill it out, it takes a month to get it to send it in, to get it graded. Find somebody to translate it, especially if they're speaking Korean, or let's say
how about
China.
Karen? I had someone who spoke Karen.
Spoke what?
Yeah, I think it's from. I think that's from a part of Indonesia, South Asia.
I've never heard of that. but you're absolutely right. It's
Karen.
It's an incredible burden on the school system and on the teachers itself to provide accommodation. And the thing is, let me just stress one more thing, Paul. It isn't that the teachers do not want to provide the services for these people or to try to help them. It's just that it causes an incredible amount of extra work on teachers who are already overburdened with the amount of work they have to do to begin with.
And this is what it comes down to is tax dollars are being spent on this, and it's not federal tax dollars, it's your local tax dollars when we're talking about the schooling. Do they need to hire a translator? Do they need to give these kids special electronic devices? Do they need to be taught English? And all of this, even the teaching of English is for the adults is usually a burden on the school district. They are usually paid for by that part. Teaching the adults is generally paid for by the feds. But again, it is your local tax dollars that are paying for those teachers. They have to get reimbursed by the feds. So the immediate output, the immediate cost is from your local tax dollars. And again, this is something I've been researching this since 2015, I should say. And this is it adds up. It adds up quickly. This doesn't even take into account whether students are functioning on grade level or if they need special education services. Now, if your child is not on grade level, which, if you're coming from a country like Ukraine, my guess is they may be on grade level. You're coming from a country like Yemen. The concept of grade level may be entirely different. So what's required we expect for a third grader is not the same thing that's expected of a third grader in Yemen. It's going to be different for each individual grade. How do we assess things, and how do they assess things? Did their child ever receive any special education services? I mean, again, this is where things get complex and we can't exactly know how much things will cost. And this, we haven't even talked about assessments of educational needs. I mean, so then now you have to talk for every SL child, they have to be evaluated. And that's an additional expense. And then they have to be evaluated at the end of the year. And this is extremely time consuming and expensive. I don't think people understand that. Again, school districts are the venue that provides a lot of this, and it's extremely, I'm not saying this is cheap, people. This is extremely expensive. Okay. The refugee resettlement state plans don't address who pays for them after 12 months. Now, this is important to understand. After 12 months, they become what is called a lawful permanent resident. This cost is necessarily passed off to the state taxpayer. So after 12 months, guess who's paying the bill? You are. Feds are done paying for them. The cost is necessarily passed off again, the state taxpayer. After 5 years of living in the United States, if they finish the naturalization process, they and have no requirement of if they should be able to get employed and all that. Then they can become a U.S. citizen. Standard practice for those coordinating state programs of refugee resettlement is to operate deceitfully, misinforming the public about the federal funds for refugees. They hold a press conference and they say, look, we've got a 5-year program, blah, 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 but they don't tell you they're only paying for the first 8 months of them being here in the United States. 8 months. Now, again, they're only considered refugees for 12 months by our law. So this is information you're not being told. They only give those refugees the TANF money for 8 months. And that money is so small. You get a family of, I sent out a FOIA to all 50 states. And some of them were giving families of $400 a month. And that's federal money. That's all they were getting. And this is a budget decided by your state of federal tax dollars. So this is one of the reasons why when the Somalis came here, a lot of them ended up going to states like Minnesota. They offered more money. So what they were doing is the Somalis were coordinating and finding out where you could get the most money and then going there. And that's the stuff that will probably start happening again. I haven't filed FOIAs on this for a while, but I have no doubt that the Ukrainians would do the same thing. And, all of a sudden the state is overburdened. There's no, we don't have a requirement saying until you become a citizen, we'd like you to stay in this area. We don't do that. So this can become problematic where one state picks up a majority of the burden. And, it's a sad, sorry truth. And I think that's it. Yes. Okay. It's kind of surprising. I bet most people are unaware of this. Were you surprised? Eric?
Well, I'm not. Well, to say I'm not surprised, because the local taxpayers, I've known that the immigration system rips the local taxpayers in the states off big time. They force these national policies that are developed by people in California, or majority of people, wherever they have the most people in the House of Representatives, and they're passed through there, and then they're forced upon the smaller states like Iowa. And there's places in our state here that we've had huge numbers of I'm not going to say which country, go into towns and literally become majorities within just a couple of years because they keep coming, they keep coming, they keep coming. And then these towns are now forced to provide all of the educational services, all the medical services, and it bankrupts the town. And these people are like, well, look, we had no say so, and all of these people being forced to, they just dropped them off here, and now, the property values, of course, plummet because the tax base has been eaten up in providing services. So yeah, I knew it was. I didn't realize it was that bad, but I knew it was. I know it was bad.
I personally was shocked. I mean, all the stuff I've been told about. I mean, I have a friend who actually ran our local refugee resettlement program through the Catholic Family Services for a number of years, and he left. You can actually find it on the Sutliffian report. You go back a ways, I believe it's at least on VTR, the interview I did with Jim Delaney a ways back. He talks about one of the reasons he stopped, and it was due to refugees feeling entitled, that they were owed these rights and this money and everything. And rather than wanting to go out and join the culture that they came to, they wanted to remain separate and just receive benefits.
Right, balkanize themselves. Sure.
This is
it's kind of reminiscent of that Scarface scene where Tony Montana he's being interviewed by the INS agents or the immigration. He goes, I want my rights right now. And so the entitlement mentality there is so true. I was having a conversation the other day when we were equating it to feeding birds, like in your backyard, because you feel sorry for them initially because it's cold and there's 3 feet of snow out there.
Don't feed them.
Okay, well, you want to throw. I'm not heartless. Okay, so you throw bird seed out there, and the birds are happy, and because they got. I'm getting to that, Rad. Give me a second time. So, and then the next thing you know, you're having to throw more bird seed out there because more birds are coming, and then after a while, they start fighting amongst each other because they can't handle the idea that they're getting free stuff. And then after they're done fighting with each other, they go up on your lawn furniture and start crapping all over the place. So it's kind of the same mentality where once you start giving away free stuff, it becomes this idea that you're entitled to free stuff. And then if you don't get it, then it's the other person's fault because they are, you pick your pejorative, they're racist, they're something phobic, or they're a bigot or whatever. Because you don't look like them, and of course they don't want to give you anything because you don't look like them, and so it's absolutely ridiculous when you start seeing the entitlement mentality come in, just like you had with Tony Montana.
Well, I just want to chime in here real quick. I'm shocked that they get so little money. I think they get more money. They get grants from the UN. They get small business loans. They get all kinds of stuff, don't they? That's what I was always told.
Well, the majority of their money, the majority of the money that goes towards refugees actually goes to these NGOs.
Yeah.
They don't go towards the refugees. The refugees themselves see very little of it.
And the NGOs are rich. Dude, seriously, we can start our own NGO. I'm looking into this. We can start our own charity and get all kinds of grant money, and we could do that. That would be great.